MCU and comic accurate being in the same sentence is so baffling, because if you know the MCU, you know that 80% of the MCU is not comic accurate. Like the Avengers Infinity Saga, Avengers Age of Ultron, a lot of the costumes that they adapt, a lot of the characters and the mini characters that they adapt, a lot of the antagonists that they adapt, so many of the MCU stories are just not comic accurate. They do not really care about the source material. Now, we have some examples of the MCU not being comic accurate, and the fact that they aren't accurate actually elevated the story that they were telling at the time. Case in point with the Civil War and the Avengers Infinity Saga, because the Civil War in the comics was a little convoluted, and me saying a little is a complete understatement. But the Infinity Saga was not comic accurate. If you actually read the source material, they did not add many characters like Lady Death, Adam Warlock, so on and so forth. They did not add the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. So if you really know the MCU, if you know it like it's the back of your hand, if you know it like it's the front of your palm, if you really go in depth and watch all of their movies, like Spider-Man's entire character and history, it's just not comic accurate. Aunt May being so young, there is no mention of Uncle Ben really, and just a lot of the decisions that the MCU has made overall, it's just a complete slap to the source material of Marvel Comics. But the crazy thing is that in 2025, in big 2025, I am actually really starting to create a sentence that I have not really heard of over the last 15 years, and that sentence consists of two words: MCU and comic accurate. Because Daredevil Born Again, they really did something in episode 3 that made me have an epiphany, that made me have a revelation of knowing that, damn, this sentence for the first time in a long time makes sense. The MCU actually did something that is comic accurate to an extent. They actually followed the source material to an extent, and obviously they made some deviations, they made some changes to the source material, but I'm actually shocked because yes, I know there are some instances of the MCU being comic accurate, like Captain America's whole origin, and there are other instances, but man, they have a lot of inconsistencies and a lot of deviations from the source material, like Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver's entire origin and their debut in Avengers Age of Ultron. Because remember, Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch, they debuted in the X-Men comics, even though they were actually one of the earliest members of the Avengers. They were not the founding members, but they were a part of one of the Avengers earliest lineups. But I just had to say that little tidbit because you should know that the MCU is not comic accurate. But Daredevil Born Again, they did something that I'm like, wow, for the first time they really respected the source material, man. Now episode 3 starts off where episode 2 left off, and we're seeing the ramifications of Hector Ayala's decision of trying to save that federal informant's life from being murdered by those 2 police officers. And remember, we saw Daredevil, he beat the shit out of the 2 police officers, one of the officers being the suspects, or if you want to be more technical, being the quote-unquote victims of this current trial. So we saw that Daredevil, he really did not want to use force because he vowed to never use physical force. He vowed to never ever try to become the Daredevil moniker ever again after Foggy's death a year before this. So now we're seeing Matt Murdock, he is trying his best to defend Hector Ayala's innocence. He knows Hector is innocent. He knows Hector did not do what the judge and the prosecutor are claiming Hector is doing, but the prosecutor is proven to be a jackass in my honest opinion. He is a annoying asshole because the prosecutor, he is just trying his best to paint a disgusting narrative and picture that Hector Ayala is a senseless killer. He's trying to basically harp on the fact that Hector Ayala caused the death of a veteran police officer, man. And before I go in depth on the prosecutor, I have to go in depth on one of the police officers that actually tried to kill that witness, but in turn caused his own colleague to die. And I don't know his name, but I don't care about his name because fuck him, because he was trying to claim that he did not know who the witness was, even though Matt Murdock, he knows that the witness has history with this police officer. But after this little court scene, we see that this same police officer, he tries to stop the transportation of the witness driving to the court. He tries to block off that witness from being transported, but thank God that Matt Murdock's team, they were smarter than that. They thought quick on their feet, and they actually tricked police officers, and not only the police officers, but they tricked anyone who was monitoring or was watching the transportation, because the witness, he gets to the court on time. But the witness, man, he is a junkie, and not only is he a junkie, but he is very unreliable, because Matt Murdock, he was betting on this entire case, and the thing that he was betting on this entire case was the witness. The witness was the only defense that he had at the moment, but the witness, he actually now did a complete 180, and he did not mention that him and the police officers knew each other. He denied everything, so this caused the entire case to almost be destroyed. So Matt Murdock had to do something drastic. He had to go behind the back of Hector Ayala, and in the next court day, he exposed to the jury and to everyone that was watching that Hector Ayala is the White Tiger. And you know, the White Tiger in the 616 comics was born and raised in San Juan, Puerto Rico. Then he later came to New York City, and he attended college, you know, at the Empire State University in New York City. And a lot of the origins and the story that Hector Ayala had in the 616 comics is very reminiscent, and it actually resembles the story and the origin of Hector Ayala in the show. Because remember, Hector Ayala in the show, he said that the amulet that he has, he did not choose the amulet. Basically, the amulet chose him. So we're seeing that Hector Ayala, he has this beck and call. He has this motive that he needs to help people, not because he necessarily wants to, but because he knows it's the right thing. And remember, in the 616 comics, he found the tiger amulets that were discarded by the Sons of the Tiger. Now, the only little inconsistencies that this show had with Hector Ayala was that they did not show Hector basically tagging along and fighting crime with the Iron Fist or with Shang-Chi, and they didn't show that Hector Ayala actually encountered the Prowler. But I'm just gonna chalk it up to the MCU not really showing us that history of the MCU just yet, because remember, Iron Fist and the Shang-Chi are already established and they already exist in the MCU. So I'll be honest with you, I'm just gonna assume that that is comic accurate, because since both characters exist, I'm gonna assume that Hector actually crossed paths with them at least one time, even though the show never stated it. And we're seeing that Hector, he will actually meet a similar ending that he met in the comics, but with a twist, because as the court case is going on, as Matt Murdock, he is telling the court that, look, my defendant, my client did not do all these things because he saved multiple police officers, he saved multiple people in need, he is saving everyone in his paths, and he even is trying to save people without the amulet. So this is actually showing who Hector Ayala's real character is. And even though the prosecutor, who is such an asshole, he is trying his best to paint the picture that, oh, good people can do bad things, bad people can do good things. So it seems that Hector, he is in the category of being a good person that has done something really, really bad. And bro, shut the fuck up. Like, dude, nobody's believing your case, man, because since all all of this is happening, the jury, they are actually starting to believe Matt Murdock's story instead of the prosecutor. So at the end, we see that the jury, they come to a conclusion that my boy Hector Ayala is not guilty on all counts. He is not guilty on first-degree murder, not guilty on second-degree murder, and not guilty of first-degree manslaughter. So my boy Hector Ayala, the White Tiger, is free. And we actually see that Hector Ayala in the 616 comics, he actually goes through a similar court battle where he is trying to defend his innocence, and he was wrongfully arrested for murder. But the difference that the MCU and the 616 comics have, but you can actually chalk it up to it being very similar, is that Hector Ayala in the 616 comics, he was not found not guilty. He was actually convicted despite the efforts of his lawyer Matt Murdock. But the thing about this is that there is something very similar that happens with both Hectors from the 616 and the MCUs, because Hector Ayala, man, my boy, was shot dead in both universes. But the thing is that in the 616 comics, he was shot dead trying to escape. But after his death, everyone now saw the real evidence that Hector was innocent. So in the show, Hector is actually innocent, but he got found not guilty. But Hector still got shot at the end of the episode, and whoever shot him, I don't think is Punisher, but he is wearing the same Punisher logo on his chest. And I am actually believing that, wait, is Punisher working with Mayor Fisk? Is he working with the Kingpin? Because earlier in the episode, we're seeing that the Kingpin was watching this court case as well. And the Kingpin, he is having his confidants to go to the streets of New York to start to cause not a gang war, but to try to manipulate both gangs. And we're seeing that Mayor Fisk, he is watching on, but there were some other police officers that have the same Punisher logo tattoo on their neck. And I've been seeing these Punisher logos throughout the first 3 episodes. So I'm actually inclined to believe that is Punisher working with the Kingpin. That is crazy. We're gonna have to see what happens in the next couple of episodes. But man, I was actually really surprised that they actually did Hector Ayala's entire story nearly 1-to-1. And that is so far-fetched in the MCU, because remember, if you know the MCU, they do not really like the source material. Sure, there are some stories like Iron Man or Captain America or the first Thor movie that were actually really comic accurate to an extent, but we have other instances like the Avengers Infinity Saga. Even though that saga was really peak, it was not comic accurate. Civil War was not comic accurate. The whole entire Spider-Man trilogy was not comic accurate. Even though Guardians of the Galaxy was peak, it was not comic accurate. You know, we're seeing all of these patterns that the MCU has proven to be not comic accurate, but this episode is comic accurate. So I have to give MCU a big round of applause, man. This episode was heat. This series so far is heat, and I think this series is a great successor to the Daredevil Netflix series, man. Y'all gotta check out this episode. But that's the end of the video, man. I'm out. Peace.